I'm Kwon Jang-ho, and it's good to have you with us. It's a new chapter in relations between the two Koreas as the two militaries ended all hostile activities along the inter-Korean border. That means no weapons, no drills, and no fly zones. We'll look at what that means for the situation on the Korean Peninsula later in the show. But first, let's get the latest updates on the day's headlines with Devin Whiting at the News Center. Devin?
Hi, Jang-ho. Our starting point this afternoon, President Moon Jae-in's speech in the National Assembly on his budget proposal. He urged lawmakers to pass it, saying the budget will create jobs and make the economy fairer. Shin Se-min reports.
President Moon Jae-in at the National Assembly for the third time since taking office in May last year. He called on lawmakers to give bipartisan support to the government's budget proposal for next year, worth around $412 billion, which is an increase from this year of 9.7%. That call comes at a critical time when the job situation and the general economic outlook has been heading south for months. But the president hasn't given up on fundamentally changing the country's economic structure with an aim to reduce economic and social polarization. What the country needs, he said, is patience.
우리 경제 체질과 사회 구조가 근본적으로 바뀌고 성과가 나타날 때까지 시간이 걸릴 수밖에 없습니다. 이제 우리는 경제적 불평등의 격차를 줄이고 더 공정하고 통합적인 사회로 나아가야 합니다. 그것이 지속 가능한 성장의 길이라고 저는 믿습니다.
The president called for an active role for the public sector, saying that it's important to use public finances to preempt the risk of an economic downturn and the loss of jobs. Included in the budget proposal is a 22% boost to the budget for jobs and in funding to encourage innovative growth and nurture SMEs and venture firms. Then the push for an inclusive society.
사회 안전망과 복지 안에서 국민이 안심할 수 있는 나라가 되어야 합니다. 국민 단 한 명도 차별받지 않는 나라가 되어야 합니다.
And through that, the president said, Korea will become an inclusive nation in which everyone prospers together. Despite the president's unchanging goal of building a people-centered economy, the country's economic prospects are likely to remain grim in the near future. So winning bipartisan support for a growing budget doesn't look easy. Shin Se-min, Arirang News.
Also in his speech today in Parliament, President Moon called on lawmakers to support his administration's efforts for peace on the Korean Peninsula. Our Hwang Ho-jun has this report.
He called it a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that must not be missed.
이제 남과 북, 미국이 확고한 신뢰 속에서 한반도의 완전한 비핵화와 항구적 평화를 이뤄낼 것입니다. 기적같이 찾아온 기회입니다.
Regarding the improving inter-Korean relations, President Moon Jae-in emphasized that peace on the Korean Peninsula is necessary to secure a sustainable future for the Republic of Korea. He underscored some of the milestones achieved in the past year. There were 3 inter-Korean summits, as well as the historic meeting between the leaders of Pyongyang and Washington in May. President Moon stressed the two Koreas have completely eliminated the danger of military clashes on the Korean Peninsula through a joint military agreement. And he said there's more to come, especially as the second Kim-Trump summit is on its way and as Kim Jong-un is expected to visit Seoul before the end of this year. He also reiterated his goal to create the Northeast Asian Railroad community with North Korea, the US, China, Japan, Russia, and Mongolia by linking Seoul's railways with those in North Korea, which will not only allow South Koreans to travel to Europe via train, but also will establish a new multilateral peace security system. If conditions permit, he also vowed to support joint projects such as forestry cooperation and the reunion of separated families through the Inter-Korean Cooperation Fund. To achieve all that, President Moon asserted that firm national security is a must. He said the 2019 budget for national defense will see an increase of 8.2% in order to boost South Korea's own defense capabilities. And more than anything, he asked for the parliament's full support.
우리가 이 기회를 놓친다면 한반도의 위기는 더욱 증폭될 수밖에 없습니다. 절대로 그런 일이 일어나지 않도록 우리가 할 수 있는 모든 노력을 다해야 한다는 노심초사의 마음을 함께 해주십시오.
President Moon insisted there can be no separation or division between the government and the National Assembly when it comes to settling peace on the Korean Peninsula. He said he hopes the permanent consultative body of the president and the 5 major political parties set to be launched this month would become the perfect platform for such cooperation. Hong Ho-jun, Arirang News.
This week, South Korea and the U.S. held an annual meeting on their defense arrangements, the Security Consultative Meeting. And in it, they agreed that even once wartime operational control of their forces is eventually transferred from the U.S. to South Korea, they'll keep the core of their arrangement, that is, Combined Forces Command. Our Defense Ministry correspondent Park Ji-won reports.
During this year's annual alliance meeting held in Washington, South Korea's Defense Minister Chung Kyung-do and his U.S. counterpart James Mattis signed a strategic guideline on combined defense that will take effect after the transition of wartime operational control in the future. They agreed that when South Korea takes control from the U.S., the Combined Forces Command between the two countries will continue as the post-OPCON transition Combined Forces Command to maintain the Allies' defense posture. However, the current U.S.-led Combined Forces Command will become an ROK-led command with a South Korean 4-star general or an admiral leading it, while an American general or an admiral will serve as deputy commander. They also agreed to continue to maintain the UN command, which has functioned as a guardian of the armistice agreement for the past 65 years, preventing an armed conflict on the Korean peninsula. The two confirmed U.S. Forces Korea will also continue to be stationed in South Korea even after the OPCON transfer is complete.
This year's SCM has greater importance and significance than any other meeting, not just due to the fact that it's the 50th of its kind, but also because it comes at a time in which we embark on an audacious journey toward denuclearization and the establishment of permanent peace on the Korean peninsula.
Signing this document, we also reaffirm the continued presence of U.S. troops stationed on the Korean peninsula in fulfillment of U.S. commitments established 65 years ago in our Mutual Defense Treaty.
South Korea handed over operational control to the U.S.-led UN command during the Korean War, and it was later transferred to the Combined Forces Command in 1978. But in case of war, Seoul and Washington agreed in 2014 that the transfer will be completed only when South Korea acquires, in a verifiable way, critical military capabilities necessary to lead the combined defense. During this year's SCM, the two defense chiefs agreed to conduct a verification of South Korea's operational capabilities starting next year. Meanwhile, a decision on a major joint air defense exercise was also finally made. During the meeting, Seoul and Washington agreed to suspend this year's Vigilant Ace, originally scheduled to be held in December. The move is aimed at strengthening current diplomatic efforts to negotiate with North Korea. This year marked the 50th anniversary of the SCM since the annual meeting was launched back in 1968 to play a key role in fine-tuning alliance-related matters. Next year's meeting will take place in Seoul. Park Ji-won, Arirang News.
It's been 2 weeks since America's top diplomat said he was scheduled to sit down with his North Korean counterpart. On Wednesday, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo confirmed that the meeting will take place next week. Although it's not clear whom he'll be meeting, multiple sources say it might be Kim Myong-chol, a top aide to the North Korean leader. Kim Yo-sun reports.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has confirmed he will meet with his North Korean counterpart next week to discuss plans for the second summit between Washington and Pyongyang. Speaking on the radio show The Laura Ingraham Show on Wednesday, Pompeo said the issue of international inspection of the North's nuclear and missile facilities is one of the agenda items that will be discussed next week. It's still unclear who Pompeo will meet with from the regime, yet Kim Myong-chol, a top aide to the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, has been cited as most likely by multiple diplomatic sources. Pompeo added he hopes the second U.S.-North summit takes place early next year, before it's too late in taking down the regime's nuclear threat. Explaining that the North's leader has a clear intention to denuclearize, Pompeo stated that Washington is ready to do everything it can to assist the regime in the process. Commenting on the fact that the North has not conducted a nuclear test or a missile launch in a long time, Pompeo highlighted that progress has been made so far, but a lot of work still needs to be done. Kim Yo-sun, Arirang News.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines.
Starting today, the South and North Korean militaries have halted all hostile acts against each other along the border. That's in accordance with the military agreement inked by the two sides last month during President Moon's visit to Pyongyang. It's a step towards the demilitarized zone becoming a truly demilitarized zone. We'll break down what this could mean for the Korean Peninsula after this report from Hong-yu.
In a move to implement the comprehensive military agreement signed by the defense chiefs of both Koreas during September's Pyongyang summit, South and North Korea will completely cease all hostile acts against each other in land, air, and sea starting November 1st. Specifically, the two Koreas agreed to cease various military exercises aimed at each other along the military demarcation line. Underground, the two sides will cease all live-fire artillery drills and field training exercises at the regiment level and above, within 5 kilometers from the MDL, which will create a 10-kilometer wide buffer zone between the two Koreas. In the sea, the two Koreas will cease all live-fire and maritime maneuver exercises within some 135-kilometer wide zone in the West Sea and some 80-kilometer wide zone in the East Sea. The two Koreas will install covers on the barrels of coastal artilleries and close all gun ports within the zones. In the air, the two sides agreed to ban tactical live-fire drills involving diverse aircraft within designated no-fly zones in the eastern and western regions along the MDL. Also, during the general-level military talks held last Friday, the two Koreas agreed to complete the reduction of 11 guard posts within each side of the DMZ by the end of November. Over at the Joint Security Area in Panmunjom, South and North Korea, as well as the U.S.-led United Nations Command, completed a third joint verification of demilitarization measures over the last weekend. The Joint Security Area will allow freedom of movement for visitors and tourists as early as next month. South Korea's Defense Ministry said Wednesday afternoon that it expects the implementation of this agreement to facilitate easing military tension and building mutual trust between the two Koreas. Hong-yu, Arirang News.
Now, for more on that, we have with us today Dr. Zhang from the Sejong Institute. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Now, it does seem like a significant step has been taken to lower military tensions between the two Koreas. As we just heard in that report, military drills have been ceased, and so have weapons, and they've been put away for now. What does this change about the relationship between the two Koreas along this border?
Of course, the foremost concerns on the border issues have been the nuclear weapons of North Korea, but at the same time, that the military crash with the conventional weapons also has been the bigger concern for South Korean militaries, because all those military crashes can be escalated into a bigger warfare between two Koreas. It is very important for two Koreas that have agreed that they are going to halt all the military acts along the borderline, which has been the hotspots for the military crashes. So it is very unlikely in the future that nuclear weapons can be used in the first place. But the thing is that if there's a military crash, even though it's a minor one, it can be escalated to bigger warfare, which can be led to the ultimate use of the nuclear weapons. So I think that the military agreement this time, which can be effective as of today, is very important to reduce the military tensions along the borderline.
This is perhaps the biggest change to the military situation between the two Koreas since the peninsula was divided some 65 years ago. I mean, would you agree to that?
Yes, there has been many efforts to reduce the tensions, but at the same time, that there has been a lot of small and mid-sized provocations, mostly from the North Korean side. And the thing is that there is no mechanism to verify that whether North Korea is sealing their artilleries or whether they are really halting their military exercises. But this time, they are trying to make joint military committee which can which can do the oversight on those activities, and I think that is why this time the agreement has more weight than the previous ones in the past.
So you've said there's more weight than in the past, but then critics would argue that actually this is not that big a significant step, that all the steps they've taken so far can be reversed very quickly, and actually North Korea hasn't given much in concessions. For example, closing gun ports, I mean, the guns are still there, but the holes are just covered up. They can remove them anytime if necessary. Do they have a point, these critics?
So the biggest criticism has came from the side that there's an asymmetric military structure between North and South Korea. The biggest concern for South Korean military is those artilleries along the borderline, and there is no concessions made by North Korea with regard to those artilleries along the borderline. So if North Korea agreed to reposition those artilleries up north, then it would be great for South Korean government. But maybe this time we agreed a little less than we hoped for, but maybe in the future we can lead to the better agreement, and that will reduce more tensions in the future.
Yes, a significant first step which could lead to more in the future, as you said. However, while South Korea has been demilitarizing the border area, at the same time, South Korea has been signed a new agreement with the US, which guarantees pretty much that US forces will remain in South Korea. So the defense chiefs of South Korea and the US met in Washington on Wednesday to sign this agreement. And as we said, the continued presence of US troops stationed there perhaps caught the eye the most. And as well as retaining the Combined Forces Command and the UN Command, which is led by the US as well. How significant is the fact that these US forces have now signed this agreement to remain?
So we have to see that the OPCON transfer or wartime OPCON transfer is not directly related to the presence of USFK on the Korean Peninsula. So the concern has been raised because once the wartime OPCON has transferred to South Korea, that means there might be some change on the combined forces command structure, which might be that U.S. general is not leading the CFC. Then if U.S. general is not leading the CFC, then U.S. government might consider that why do we have to put our military forces on the Korean Peninsula? So that's why there was a concerns that USFK might be withdrawn if wartime OPCON has transferred to South Korean government. So this time at the SCM special consultative meetings, that two ministers and the secretaries agreed that the presence of USFK is not related to the OPCON transfer. So I think that's a good sign for alliance management.
I think it is quite interesting, as I said, like between, on one hand, the South Koreans are having a deal with the North Koreans to demilitarize the border, whereas on the other hand, they're having a deal with the US to keep military forces on the peninsula. So doesn't it show the two sides that South Korea has to play in this situation with North Korea and the US, with South Korea in the middle?
So South Korean government and the U.S. government has been doing this SCM for a fairly long time, and the problem for the military agreement with the North Korea is that there has been a lot of efforts to make a new agreement with the North Korea, but it has not been successful because of all those provocations made by North Korea. So I don't think it's a like two-way game for South Korean government, but this year we have made a lot of progress on both sides, and I think the military agreement with North Korea can have some positive effect on SCM meeting with the United States this year.
One of the other agreements that was reached during this SCM meeting as well was the defence ministers confirmed that the Vigilant Ace defence air exercises will not be taking place this December as originally planned and will be postponed to a later date. Now, how important was it to postpone these military exercises in light of the recent situation with North Korea?
So during the Singapore summit on June, that President Trump mentioned that while the dialogue with North Korea is going on, he's going to suspend all the military drills with South Korea. So now, even though there are some fluctuations of the relations between U.S. and North Korea, the dialogue is still going on. Secretary Pompeo actually mentioned that he's going to meet his counterpart next week. So I think it's a natural step for the U.S. government and South Korean government to agree to suspend more mega-sized military drills between two governments. So I think that two governments have still agreed that there's just still possibility that we can solve the nuclear issue of North Korea more peacefully than before.
I would like to go on to that point about Pompeo's meeting in just a second. But first, before we move on, I want to talk about as well, there was some reports the US had been unhappy with South Korea over its new military agreement with North Korea to try and demilitarize. But Defence Secretary Jim Mattis tried to dispel some of these reports, giving his support to the military agreement in the SCM joint communique. What do you think? I mean, are the US actually okay with this inter-Korean military agreement, or do they still have reservations, do you think?
So I think that there are two reasons that why some believe that U.S. was not happy about the military agreement. First, that there was a limited consultation between two governments about the military agreement. So the U.S. military was not well informed about this military agreement in advance. And second part is that those no-fly zone and the limited act along the borderline actually limit the CFC. So it's not the it should not be unilateral decision by the Korean government, but the United States and the UN command should be involved in the discussion. But I think that South Korean government and US government discussed enough to understand that this military agreement can lead to the peaceful mood on the borderline. So I think that is why Secretary Mattis said that he gave his support to the military agreement.
Okay, so as you said, Pompeo has confirmed that he will be meeting with his North Korean counterpart next week in the US after the midterm elections. But we've been here before. You know, Pompeo previously said last month that he'd be meeting with North Korean officials very soon, but that didn't happen. And now he's saying it again, but giving no exact date, and we don't even know who he's going to meet. Do you think this meeting with North Korean officials will happen?
So I think this is like second time in last couple of days that Secretary Pompeo mentioned that he's going to meet his counterpart. So if it is Kim Young-chul, then probably he would say it's going to be Kim Young-chul. But as he said that he's going to meet his counterpart, somehow I believe that he somehow hope that his counterpart would be changed this time, because United States government has showed their dissatisfaction with the dialogue with Kim Young-chul before. So I think that is why the Secretary Pompeo cannot exactly mention that when and where that meeting is going to be held, and he cannot know who's going to be there as his counterpart for the talk.
The fact that he doesn't know who his counterpart is, it seems that way. Is that what I think that's what you're implying. How frustrating do you think it would be? And how does it show how difficult this is to deal with North Korea, who they won't even tell you who's going to be at the meeting?
So that's the problem between US and North Korea, that even if North Korea agreed to meet Secretary Pompeo or like working level group, like including the Mr. Steve Biegun, the problem is that North Korea has not agreed to officially launch the negotiation for removing its nuclear weapons. Even though they agreed to meet this time, it might be about the scheduling the second summit between President Trump and the Chairman Kim. So I think that even though they agreed to meet like next week, it does not necessarily mean that they agree to discuss about the denuclearization process of North Korea.
Well, we'll have to look forward to that and see whether this meeting does happen. But first, of course, we've got the US midterm elections, and we'll have to see how they turn out as well. Anyway, it's great to have you on the show. We're out of time, so we'll hopefully see you next time. And we always look forward to your insights.
Thank you.
And that's where we'll close it out. Thank you for staying with us. I'll be back with more analysis of the day's top stories, same time tomorrow, right here on Arirang. Hope you can join us again then. Goodbye.
(2018) Overseas TV Audience Survey. Arirang TV and Gallup Korea are conducting research on viewer opinions. Your honest answers will be used